The snowstorm was merciless, blanketing everything in silence. On her way home from a late shift, 29-year-old wildlife nurse Hannah found something unusual, a trembling bundle of fur by the roadside. Thinking it was just another lost kitten or dog, she wrapped it in her coat. But 3 days later, when a wild bobcat appeared at her doorstep, not to attack, but to stare with unsettling intelligence, Hannah realized she hadn't rescued a stray. She'd stepped into something ancient, wild, and life-changing. What this mother did next would leave Hannah and the entire town of White Pine Hollow speechless. Sometimes, the smallest footsteps in the snow can lead you straight into the heart of the wild. The roadside discovery. The snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing everything in a world of silence. The headlights of Hannah Whitaker's old Subaru Outback cut through the storm like twin blades, flickering against the whirling white. The road ahead was barely visible, just a narrow path of tire tracks already filling with fresh snow. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the dark fabric of her gloves. It was just past midnight, and the storm had rolled in harder than the forecast had predicted. Hannah had stayed late at the Wildlife Rehab Center, tending to an injured hawk that refused to eat. Typical of her. Always the last to leave. Always the one to say, "Just one more check." She yawned, rubbing one eye, already imagining the warmth of her log cabin and the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her boots. Then, just past mile marker 62 on County Road 14, something flashed low to the ground, barely more than a shadow. She slowed instinctively, squinting through the windshield. Her heart kicked a beat. Something was lying just off the shoulder, a misshapen lump, half buried in snow. Trash? A dead animal? Number. She pulled over. Hannah stepped out into the storm, the wind slicing across her face. The cold bit through her jeans instantly, but she moved forward with purpose, boots crunching through ice-packed snow. About 10 feet from the road, she found it, a tiny creature, curled in on itself, barely breathing. It shivered violently, its fur crusted with frost, legs twitching weakly in the powder. She knelt beside it, brushing away the snow with shaking fingers. Her breath caught. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a cat either. The ears were too pointed. The fur, a blend of light gray and sandy brown, was thick and marked with faint black rosettes. She saw spots on the legs, a white chin, and tufted ears that drooped with exhaustion. A kitten, but not a house kitten. Wild. Possibly his bobcat. "God," she whispered. "What happened to you?" The kitten's eyes cracked open, cloudy, barely conscious. A faint whimper escaped its lips, more like a squeak than a meow. Hannah hesitated. Wildlife rescue protocol was clear. Wild animals belonged in the wild. But this one wouldn't survive another hour in the storm. And protocol didn't mean much when life or death was staring you in the face. "I'm not leaving you here," she muttered. Peeling off her scarf, she gently wrapped the kitten inside, shielding it from the wind. The bundle barely moved in her arms as she trudged back to the Subaru. Inside, she cranked the heat and tucked the kitten into her lap, rubbing it gently through the fabric. The drive home was slow, careful. Her cabin stood near the tree line just a few miles out from White Pine Hollow's main road. A wooden structure, surrounded by pines and silence. When she pulled up, the porch light barely pierced the snowy dark. Inside, she moved quickly, setting the kitten on a soft fleece towel near the fireplace. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the old radiator and the occasional groan of snow sliding from the roof. She kept her movements deliberate, warming a heating pad, fetching her small vet kit. The kitten didn't fight her touch. In fact, it barely responded at all. Its paws were like ice, its breathing shallow. "You're a tough little thing, aren't you?" she said softly, placing warm towels around its body. She filled a syringe with diluted milk replacer, safe for felines, and slowly coaxed a few drops into its mouth. The creature swallowed weakly. That was enough. It meant hope. Over the next hour, Hannah kept vigil by the fire, watching its breathing even out, watching its tiny chest rise and fall. Her cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, a stark contrast to the wildness she'd just brought into her living room. She knew this wasn't standard procedure, knew that she would probably have to report it. But not yet. Just for tonight, she thought. Tonight it would rest, warm, safe. Tomorrow, she'd figure out the rest. As she finally settled into the armchair nearby, blanket draped over her legs, she cast one last glance at the bundle by the fire. "Who do you belong to, little one?" she murmured. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but something else moved out there too. Quiet, watching, waiting. Healing is more than medicine. Sometimes it's the quiet you offer a frightened soul. Nursing the wild. The fire cracked softly in the hearth, casting flickering amber light across the walls of Hannah's small cabin. The wind outside still moaned through the trees, but inside, everything had settled into a hush, the kind that only comes after a rescue. Wrapped in layers of warmth and fleece, the wild kitten barely stirred, its breathing steady but shallow. Hannah knelt nearby, her eyes scanning for signs of fever or shock. She wasn't just a wildlife nurse by profession. This was her language. She spoke in temperatures, heart rates, hydration checks, and instinct. She kept her voice low, murmuring softly to the little creature as she worked. "I've got you. Just hold on." The animal didn't resist the tiny feeding syringe again. The formula, made from goat milk, egg yolk, and carefully warmed water, trickled into its mouth in tiny drops. The kitten blinked slowly, too weak to move, but no longer on the edge of slipping away. After 30 minutes, she set the bottle down and leaned back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then gently, she reached out and brushed the matted fur along the animal's spine. "What are you?" It looked like a bobcat, at least partially. The tufted ears, the faint white markings on the inner legs, the short bobtail, all signs of Lynx rufus, the North American bobcat. But there was something else. It didn't hiss. It didn't snarl. It didn't recoil at her presence. Wild, yes, but not feral, not defensive. It watched her with a strange stillness. She took a photo on her phone and texted it to her colleague, Dr. Amos, the senior wildlife vet at the rescue center. "Bobcat kitten, maybe 10 to 12 weeks, found roadside, nearly frozen, not aggressive." No reply yet. Hannah stood slowly, knees creaking, and stretched her arms. Her cabin wasn't big, maybe 900 square feet, but every inch felt like hers. Pine-paneled walls, a hand-built bookshelf, worn rugs, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of rosemary and sage. A few animal carriers were tucked under a bench near the mudroom. Old habits. She'd rescued everything from owls to foxes, but never anything like this. She set up a temporary pen, using a soft-sided pet crate lined with towels. When she lifted the kitten gently and placed it inside, it didn't protest. It curled its body tightly and nestled into the fabric as if it had known comfort before. That unsettled her. Wild bobcats usually hissed, clawed, or at least stayed hyper-alert. This one was injured, yes, but it didn't behave like it had been raised in the wild. She returned to the fireplace and stirred the logs. Embers glowed brightly, casting light over the small wooden room. Her journal lay open on the side table, half filled with field notes and wildlife sketches. She opened a fresh page and began to write, Night 1. Juvenile bobcat, approximately. 3 pounds, female. Fur coloration normal but slightly dulled. Likely dehydration and exposure. Breathing stabilized with warmth and small feedings. Behavior unusually calm. No growls, no pawing. Trust behavior atypical. She paused. Her pen hovered for a moment. Possibility. Orphaned or raised in proximity to humans. She didn't like that thought. Wild animals were supposed to fear humans. It was safer. For them and for people. The idea that this one might have been socialized was troubling. If it had been raised near humans, it could be in danger later. Misunderstood. Marked as a threat. The kettle whistled on the stove. She poured herself a mug of chamomile tea and sat in her favorite chair by the window, cradling the warmth in her hands. The snow outside had slowed to a drift, and the trees beyond swayed under the weight of white. She glanced at the crate. The kitten was staring at her. Eyes open now, alert. Still not moving much, but studying her face as if memorizing it. She stood, stepped closer. The kitten didn't flinch. She reached through the open top flap and gently touched its fur. No resistance. "You're watching me like you've known humans before," she whispered. She set down her tea and pulled a small wildlife camera from her closet. If she was going to keep this kitten, even for observation, she needed documentation. She placed the cam on a tripod near the crate and hit record. Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Amos. "Definitely bobcat. Rare to see one that young alive in the wild during a storm. If it's calm, keep it stable but proceed with caution. Could be a cub separated too early. Any sign of trauma?" Hannah typed quickly, "No visible injuries. Just extreme cold and starvation. Unusual behavior, quiet, calm. No signs of aggression." No reply. She returned to the kitten, placing a shallow bowl of water just outside the crate's mesh. After a moment, the kitten lifted its head and sniffed at the scent. Then, with deliberate movements, it crawled forward and began to drink. "Good girl," Hannah whispered. She sat cross-legged by the crate for another hour, watching it, taking notes, recording everything. In the quiet, the only sounds were the soft clicks of the camera, the occasional snap of wood in the fire, and the gentle lapping of a kitten trying to survive. Outside, the snow had stopped, but Hannah had the strangest sensation, as if the forest was holding its breath. She turned toward the window. Somewhere, out there, beyond the tree line and the darkness, something was waiting, watching. Some eyes in the forest do not blink. They simply wait. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving White Pine Hollow shrouded in an eerie silence. The snow-covered landscape outside Hannah's cabin looked untouched, almost too still, like a painting left to freeze in time. Inside, Hannah stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stovetop. She'd barely slept, but her body ran on instinct now. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake the wild kitten still curled inside the crate beside the fireplace. Occasionally, the tiny creature let out a soft huff, then went still again. Steam rose from the bowl in her hand as she carried it to the small table near the window. Her boots squeaked softly against the wood floors as she passed a coat rack, draped in snow-wet jackets and scarves. She paused at the window, sipping her coffee. That's when she noticed them. Tracks. They weren't hers, not boot prints. These were lighter, whiter, paw-shaped. Maybe 6 inches across. They led from the edge of the forest to the corner of her cabin, and then vanished beneath the porch. Her breath caught. Coyote, mountain lion, number, she knew predator tracks. These were different. Short, rounded toes, no claw marks. And they were deliberate, careful, as if whoever made them was trying not to be noticed. Bobcat, an adult. Her pulse quickened. She pulled on her boots, coat and gloves in a hurry, and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was sharp, biting at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. She crouched by the edge of the snow and studied the tracks more closely. They weren't wandering. They had come in a straight line from the trees to the porch, then gone. Something had approached in the night, not to attack, not to explore, to find, to watch. She followed the trail for a few yards toward the tree line, but they stopped just beneath a snow-laden cedar. There, nestled against the trunk, was something else. A dead rabbit. Not torn apart, no blood, no wounds. Clean, like an offering. She stared at it, confused, a slow chill crawling up her spine. Wild predators didn't leave prey uneaten, and they didn't gift food. Something else was happening. Hannah returned to the cabin slowly, glancing over her shoulder. She felt it again, that prickling at the back of her neck, a sense that the woods were more alive than they should be. She locked the door behind her and glanced at the kitten, now awake and sitting up, its eyes blinking slowly. "You brought company, didn't you?" she murmured. She reviewed the trail cam footage from overnight. The small device near the porch had recorded a few frames between 3:04 and 3:06 a.m. Most were blurry, but in one still image, she caught it. The shape of a large feline, frozen in mid-step. Wide-set eyes, tufted ears, dense winter coat. The profile was unmistakable. An adult bobcat, watching her cabin from just 15 feet away. Its posture was not one of aggression. It wasn't crouched to pounce or pacing in nervous patterns. It simply stood there, looking toward the window, toward the crate, toward the kitten. Hannah leaned back in her chair, her heart thudding. It made sense now. The cub hadn't been abandoned. It had been lost. And the mother was looking for her. All her training, all her years of experience, had taught her what to do in this situation. Report to the local wildlife division. Initiate a recovery or reintroduction plan. Alert authorities that a potentially dangerous predator was frequenting a residential zone. But her instincts, the deeper ones, the human ones, told her something else. "Don't interfere, not yet." She watched the kitten stretch and yawn, its ears perking up as if it sensed something outside. Then it crawled to the edge of the crate and pressed its nose to the mesh wall. A soft chirp escaped its throat, a sound like a call, like it remembered something. That afternoon, Hannah moved the crate to the front porch, wrapped it in thermal blankets, and placed a heat lamp above it. She stayed nearby, notebook in hand, camera recording, and waited. The kitten slept, curled tight, but occasionally opened one eye, sniffing the air. Snow began to fall again, gently this time. A flurry, not a storm. And then, just before dusk, she saw it again. Movement in the trees. The same shape, same silence, but closer. A bobcat stood at the edge of the woods, just inside the shadows, staring directly at the porch. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, its tail low, body still. The kitten's ears twitched. It stirred, lifted its head. Then let out another soft chirp. The adult bobcat tilted its head, still not moving, still watching. Then, as quietly as it had come, the figure turned and disappeared back into the forest, leaving only a trail of paw prints behind. Hannah stared long after it was gone. She didn't understand what was happening, not fully. But she knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't over. Something was building. Something beyond science, beyond logic. A reunion was coming. And she was in the middle of it. The mother appears the third morning. The next morning arrived, not with a sunrise, but with a dull gray sky heavy with clouds. Hannah stirred early, drawn from restless sleep by the same sense of alertness that had gripped her for days. She slipped into her coat and boots before the coffee even brewed, heading straight for the porch to check on the kitten. To her surprise, it was already awake, sitting up, alert, staring out through the crate's mesh as though waiting for something. Or someone. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape again, smoothing out yesterday's footprints. But Hannah felt it in her bones. Something had passed through. She checked the thermal camera she'd placed beneath the eaves. Her breath caught. The timestamp read 5:17 a.m. The image was clear. A full-grown bobcat stood at the base of the porch steps, eyes reflecting the infrared beam. The cat wasn't moving, wasn't prowling. It was sitting, still, erect, like a sentinel, like a mother waiting. Hannah glanced down at the kitten. It gave a soft mewl and shifted toward the door of the crate. Heart pounding, Hannah sat down beside the crate just inches away from the small feline. "You know her," she whispered. There was no doubt anymore. A wordless conversation. The fourth night brought snow again, but lighter now, just enough to muffle the sounds of the forest. Hannah stayed up late, bundled in her parka and seated on the floor near the glass door, the crate beside her. At 9:42 p.m., she felt it. The air changed. No footsteps, no growls. But when she looked through the glass, she saw her. The bobcat stood no more than 10 feet from the porch, poised between the pine trees and the light spilling out from the cabin window. Her coat was speckled with frost. Her breath came in clouds. And her eyes, greenish, rimmed in gold, met Hannah's without flinching. They stared at one another. Neither moved. The kitten inside the crate let out a soft sound. Not fear, not pain. Just a sound of recognition. The adult bobcat flicked one ear and stepped forward. Slow and careful. 3 steps. Then stopped again. She tilted her head, not at the light, not at the structure, at the crate, at her child. The moment stretched long, still, charged with a quiet power. Hannah's throat tightened. She reached toward the latch but stopped. Her instincts screamed caution. Too soon, too much. But she had to try something. Moving slowly, she unzipped a corner of the mesh panel, letting the kitten poke its head out into the porch air. It didn't bolt. It didn't run. It chirped. That same soft call. The adult bobcat stepped forward again, 2 feet from the porch now. Still no aggression, no growl, no hiss, just presence. The wind shifted. Hannah blinked, and the bobcat was gone. Melted, back into the forest as silently as she had come. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. How do you prepare for the return of something wild? How do you release something that's begun to trust you? At 3 a.m., she woke with a start. The trail cam near the crate had gone off. She rushed to the monitor. There it was again, the bobcat, this time closer. This time, she left something. At the foot of the stairs, clearly placed and not eaten, lay a freshly killed squirrel. No blood, no mess, just another silent offering. Hannah stared at the screen, her heart aching. The mother wasn't just searching. She was trying to communicate. She was saying, "I'm still here. I haven't given up." She was saying, "I trust you." The following morning, the snow had stopped. The sun broke through for the first time in days, casting long, golden beams across the porch. The kitten had more energy now, pacing the crate, stretching, chirping more frequently. It was time to decide. Hannah stood at the edge of the porch, staring into the woods. She didn't know if the mother would return today, or tomorrow, but she knew what she had to do. That afternoon, she moved the crate outside completely, right to the edge of the porch steps. She left the top half unzipped. Just enough, not open, not closed, a choice. She placed a GoPro on a tripod, aimed at the crate, then stepped back into the house and sat in the window, watching, waiting. The kitten sat at the edge, eyes scanning the trees. And for the first time since she'd found her, Hannah didn't feel like a rescuer anymore. She felt like a bridge, a witness, someone caught in the middle of something ancient and sacred. Outside, the woods stood silent, but not empty. The wild was watching, and soon it would act. To love something wild is to know when to step back and trust that it remembers the way home. The afternoon air was cold, but still. Hannah sat on the cabin floor just inside the doorway, her knees hugged to her chest, eyes fixed on the small crate at the edge of the porch. The flap remained open, fluttering slightly in the wind. The kitten sat inside, staring out, not with fear, but with an odd expectancy, like it was waiting for a cue. Hannah's heartbeat echoed in her ears. Letting go had always been the hardest part. She'd rehabbed owls with shattered wings, nursed raccoons orphaned by speeding cars, helped fawns stand again after being caught in barbed wire. But this was different. This wasn't a case of healing and releasing. This was a reunion. A mother and child who had been separated by a storm and by fate. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the contact labeled Colorado Wildlife Rescue Authority. She knew the number by heart. Her mentor, Dr. Amos, had urged her to call as soon as she confirmed the adult bobcat's return. But Hannah hadn't dialed. Not yet. What would she tell them? That the mother had brought her gifts? That the cub seemed to know her without question? They wouldn't believe the emotional depth of what she had witnessed. They'd cite policy, relocation, tagging, sedation, maybe even captivity. But this wasn't about humans. This was something ancient and sacred, and she wasn't going to ruin it by inserting control into a bond that had nothing to do with her. She slid the phone into her pocket. "I trust you," she whispered, not just to the kitten, but to the forest beyond. At 4:53 p.m., just as the last golden rays of sunlight filtered through the pines, the air shifted again. The woods rustled. The trees exhaled. And she came. The adult bobcat stepped into the clearing slowly, head low, movements precise. Her body was lean, but strong. Her shoulders rippled beneath her mottled fur. Her green-gold eyes never blinked as she approached the crate. Hannah didn't move, didn't breathe. The kitten stood. For the first time, it walked out of the crate completely, its small paws padding across the snow-dusted wood. It paused for only a moment at the edge. One look back at Hannah, then forward. The cub chirped once. The mother answered with a low, throaty growl, not a warning, but a welcome. They met halfway between porch and tree line. The cub nuzzled into the adult's chest, and the mother lowered her head, licking her kit between the ears. The forest held its breath. So did Hannah. Then, in a fluid, silent motion, the mother turned. With the cub in step beside her, she padded into the trees. No fear, no haste, just the return to where they belonged. Hannah remained on the porch long after they disappeared into the forest, the faint tracks in the snow, the only evidence that they had been there at all. She wiped a tear from her cheek. Not sadness, gratitude. The wild had allowed her a glimpse into its most private moment, a mother's love, the will to reunite, and the power of trust. She didn't save that kitten. She simply gave her a pause in the storm, long enough for something incredible to happen. Between the trees, the forest had a way of absorbing sound. As the bobcat and her cub vanished between the trees, it felt as if the entire world exhaled. No birds stirred. No branches cracked. Even the wind, which had whispered through the trees all morning, held still, like the forest itself was honoring the moment. Hannah didn't move. She remained at the edge of the porch, one gloved hand resting lightly against the crate. The small wild animal that had fought so hard to live, and trust, was gone now. Not lost this time, not abandoned, returned. Her eyes remained fixed on the snow-covered trail that wound between the trees, even though the pair had disappeared minutes ago. The light was fading, casting long shadows between the pine trunks. The trees had closed around them like a curtain, final and protective. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. "You found her." Her breath misted in the air, and a tightness pulled at her chest. Not sadness exactly, though part of her ached at the sudden quiet, but something deeper. A reverent kind of awe. She had witnessed something rare. Not just a reunion, but a moment of pure instinct, memory, and love. A wild creature had waited, had watched, and had known exactly when to return. She stepped slowly toward the edge of the porch, her boots crunching in the packed snow. For a second, she considered following the trail, just a little, just enough to see where they went. But she stopped herself. This wasn't her story to chase. This was the part where she stepped back, where she let the forest have them again. She turned and walked inside. The cabin, usually filled with motion, rattling medicine bottles, the hum of a kettle, the shuffle of paws or wings, was utterly still. The crate sat empty by the fire. The blankets she'd used to warm the kitten were folded neatly now, but the indent of its small body remained. A faint imprint. A memory. She knelt down and ran her fingers gently over the crate's mesh, then rested her hand against the fleece inside. "I hope she teaches you how to be wild again," she said. The fireplace crackled gently, flames licking up the log she'd added that morning. The warmth no longer felt like protection. It felt like sanctuary. Hannah stood and crossed to her journal, still open from last night's observations. She picked up her pen and, after a long moment, began to write. Day 4, 5:11 p.m. Kitten rejoined adult bobcat. Behavior: immediate recognition, confirmed through vocalization and physical contact. Cub showed no hesitation. Adult led cub into forest with no aggression toward human presence. Actions suggest previous, persistent maternal tracking, and non-hostile awareness of cabin proximity. She paused, then wrote slower. I was never the answer, just the pause between the storm and the reunion. Afterward, she made tea, something herbal. She drank it slowly on the porch, wrapped in her thickest coat. Twilight had fallen fully now. Stars were appearing above the black lace of the treetops. She listened, hoping, maybe foolishly, to hear that familiar chirp again. Instead, she heard only quiet. And then, a rustle, not close, not near the porch, but far off, down near the base of the ridge. A soft, deliberate crunch of paws on snow. She stood. Just within the tree line stood the mother bobcat. The cub was not at her side this time, maybe already tucked in a den somewhere warm. The adult looked at her. Not for long. Just a flicker of connection in the darkness. Her body silhouetted against the last sliver of light. A heartbeat. Then she turned, shoulders rippling, and disappeared for the last time between the trees. Secrets of the night forest. The snow had hardened overnight, its surface now a crusty, pale sheet beneath the gray morning sky. Hannah rose early again, restless, as if her body hadn't realized that the tension was over, that the kitten had gone, that the visitor no longer lurked outside her door. She poured herself a mug of black coffee and made her way to the small monitor connected to her trail cameras. She hadn't checked them since the reunion. She didn't even know what she was hoping to see. Maybe proof that it had all happened. Maybe something more. The footage began to load. The first clips were uneventful, soft wind through the trees, falling snowflakes drifting past the lens. Then the timestamp shifted to 3:58 a.m., several hours before the bobcat and her cub vanished into the woods. She leaned forward, heart quickening. There she was, the mother bobcat. Not on the porch this time, but just beyond it. Barely 20 feet away, crouched beneath the shadows of a cedar tree. The camera caught her profile, her breath curling visibly in the cold. For several long minutes, she simply sat there, unmoving, her eyes focused on the crate. Hannah paused the footage. This wasn't random. The mother had been watching. She had known. Not only where her cub was, but that it was safe. It was as if she had been waiting for the right time, as if she trusted Hannah to keep the kitten alive until she could reclaim her. Hannah's fingers trembled slightly as she hit play again. In the next clip, the bobcat rose and moved closer, stepping soundlessly across the snow. She circled the porch once, then twice. She didn't try to claw her way in. She didn't scratch at the crate or growl at the walls. She simply sat, patient, listening. That's when another motion alert appeared. This time, it was the kitten. From inside the crate, the tiny figure pressed its nose against the mesh, paws stretched forward. A chirp echoed faintly on the audio feed. Then another. The mother responded, not with a roar, but a soft, low sound, almost like a hum, a vibration. It was communication, not instinct, not reaction, recognition. The moment stole Hannah's breath. She clicked through more frames, each one adding another brushstroke to the image forming in her mind. In one, the bobcat leaned forward and nudged something gently toward the porch. A second rabbit, this one smaller, laid with the same care as before. A gift, a trade, a gesture of peace. And then she was gone again. Hannah leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by emotion. She had studied wild behavior her entire adult life. She'd read the research papers, filed reports, even contributed to published findings. But nothing in a textbook had prepared her for this. This wasn't just biology. It wasn't just instinct. It was something older than science. It was something sacred. She copied several clips to a separate drive, labeling them Bobcat Interaction, January. She'd share them with Dr. Amos. But she already knew. No one would feel what she had felt. Not unless they had stood on that porch. Not unless they had looked into the eyes of a creature the world called wild and seen something entirely familiar staring back. Later that afternoon, she walked down to where the forest began. She followed the path the mother had taken, with slow, deliberate steps. The snow had started to melt slightly beneath the winter sun, leaving impressions where paws had pressed into the earth. They led deep into the woods. Hannah didn't follow far. Just enough to know, just enough to stand where the mother had stood and whisper into the trees. "Thank you." The forest didn't answer, but it didn't need to, when word spread. By the end of the week, Hannah's quiet cabin in White Pine Hollow was no longer quite so quiet. It started with a phone call from Dr. Amos. "I saw the footage," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You documented the whole thing." "I didn't plan to," Hannah replied softly. "I just didn't want to forget it." He paused. Then, with unusual gentleness, "It's extraordinary." Within days, a copy of her footage had made its way through the internal network at the Colorado Wildlife Rescue Authority. Biologists, rehab specialists, and even state rangers began contacting her, not to reprimand her for not calling sooner, but to ask permission to observe, to learn. And then someone leaked the clips. A single grainy still of the mother and cub, nose to nose under the porch light, made it to a local wildlife forum. From there, it spread like wildfire. Before she knew it, a regional news outlet contacted her, asking for an interview. She declined politely. But the story had already taken root. Headlines appeared online. Wild bobcat returns for her cub in stunning reunion. Woman shelters lost kitten, then the wild comes knocking. Proof that instinct isn't just survival, it's love. Hannah didn't seek the attention. She didn't care for the fame. But quietly, she was glad the world was seeing something beautiful. Because this wasn't just a story of a rescue. It was a story of a return, of trust given freely, of two worlds colliding, not with violence, but with understanding. And even as she shut her front door to the buzz of reporters and wildlife enthusiasts, Hannah smiled to herself. Let them talk. She knew the truth of what had happened. And the forest? The forest didn't care for headlines. It simply kept its secrets. And sometimes, if you listened closely enough, it let you witness one. The seasons turned. Snow melted from the treetops. Spring came late that year, but when it did, It softened the edges of the forest. Streams bubbled free, crocuses pushed through the thawed earth, and the air began to hum with life again. But even as warmth returned to White Pine Hollow, Hannah found herself changed. She still walked the old trails, still opened her cabin to creatures in need, still brewed her tea at dusk and sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. But something deep inside her had shifted. It wasn't just the memory of the kitten. It wasn't even the reunion. It was what came after. Because the mother had returned. More than once. Always in silence. Always unseen by others. But Hannah knew. The paw prints reappeared every few weeks near the edge of the trees. Sometimes there was fresh prey left neatly by the steps. A rabbit, a squirrel, once even a pheasant. Other times, there were only faint tracks and the distinct, musky scent of bobcat fur left on the wind. They never stayed long, and they never came close again. But they came, and Hannah never stopped watching. One morning in early December, nearly a full year since that stormy night, a new trail appeared near the base of her property. It led not from the forest, but down from the ridge where the pines grew dense and sharp. Two sets of tracks, one large, one small. She followed them briefly, her breath puffing white in the air. Her boots pressed gently into the crust of snow, beside the soft imprints of wild feet. And then she saw them, just through a gap in the trees. The mother, regal as ever, standing tall beside a younger bobcat. Larger now, sleeker, but unmistakable. The same ears, the same eyes. The cub had survived, thrived, and now she stood beside her mother, confident, calm. They saw Hannah. They didn't run. They didn't come closer either. They simply stood for one long, perfect moment, then turned and disappeared into the trees again. And this time, Hannah didn't cry. She smiled. She understood. That was the final chapter. Not a goodbye, but a message. They had written their story, together, and now it belonged to the wild again. That evening, Hannah lit a small fire in her hearth and opened her journal one last time to the page marked January. She added only one sentence. They returned. Then she closed the book. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, silent. And somewhere between the trees, a story slept peacefully in the hush of the forest, no longer needing to be told, because it had already been lived. In a world that moves fast, where we so often seek control, this story reminds us of something quietly powerful. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to step back and trust the wild to take care of its own. Hannah didn't just rescue a kitten. She became part of something older than science, older than fear. A bond formed not with leashes or cages, but with patience, respect, and the courage to let go. In our lives, we're often faced with choices, to intervene, to hold on, to fix what's broken. But like the mother bobcat, sometimes the answer isn't louder action. It's quiet presence. And like Hannah, sometimes our role isn't to own the outcome, but to protect the space where healing can happen. At Paw Prints and Stories, we share tales, not just about animals, but about what they teach us about ourselves. So here's your challenge. Where in your life can you be like Hannah? Can you choose to trust, to wait, or to gently step aside and still believe in the return of something beautiful?